Today is going to be magical because you're going to learn a little bit of CSS Houdini. Before we begin, this video's sponsor is Linode, and they make it easy and affordable to host your site, app, or service on whatever technology stack you use. Unlike entry-level hosting services, Linode is a step up to powerful, fast, fully configurable cloud computing. With server plans starting at just $5 plus no hidden fees or surprise outages, Linode offers a no-nonsense hosting at a price you can afford. So sign up now using the link below to get a $20 credit on your new Linode account. Hey everyone, what's up? Gary Simon of CourseCetro.com. So today, in the second edition of our Future CSS series, we're gonna be taking a look at something which is huge, and that is called CSS Houdini. Now, it's been talked about and it's been in development for several years, but basically, it allows you to tie into the CSS API. So what does that mean? Well, there's a bunch of different use cases and there's a bunch of different abilities that you're going to have in the future with CSS Houdini. You can start experimenting with it now, but just know that browser support, it's just not there yet. And so, in fact, if you want to use it on Google Chrome, if you want to follow this tutorial, you have to go to Chrome flags right here, this little URL in Chrome, and you have to enable developer tools experiments. So just do a search for that there because there's a lot of flags here, and then choose enabled. All right, then you'll restart the browser and you'll be able to start experimenting with CSS Houdini. Now you may be wondering, is Houdini ready yet? Well, Houdini's broken up into seven different, I guess you could say, layers. There's a layout API, a paint API, a parser API, properties and values API, et cetera, you can read, I hope. The paint API is the most supported along with the typed OM. We're going to get into the paint API today and also the properties and values API because the properties and values are very, very cool. And the paint API is going to allow us, with the help of the properties API, is going to allow us to do this sort of ugly thing that I have going on here. So what's happening here is we have these dots, these circles with a little line underneath. Well, the CSS for this, for H1, this H1 element right here, is background image, paint. That's an interesting property you probably never saw before. And then something called Simon BG, which is right here defined in this section. And we basically have created this little this graphic for all the H1 elements in this section right here in this file. And now we can use it right here. And then we can even make it dynamic with this custom property called number of circles. So we can specify how many circles we want to show up underneath. So if I just want 3, well, I can get 3. So there is a ton of use cases for this stuff. Hopefully, you'll be excited as I am for the future of CSS. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll shut up. Let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, I have Visual Studio Code opened with a blank folder called Houdini, as we can see here. Let's create an index.html here. Oh, come on, Gary. HTML, what's that supposed to stand for? Jesus. Okay, we're off to a great start already. CSS folder, we'll just have a main.css file. We're not going to use Sass or anything. We're not doing crazy CSS today. And then we'll go back into our index.html. We're going to hit exclamation point for an Emmet abbreviation to get some boilerplate. And then we're going to link, of course, our CSS main CSS file. All right, so the first thing that we'll do is we're going to reference a JavaScript file here. So script source is going to be equal to, we'll just call this one vars.js. We could do this inline as well, but I kind of want to separate things up because we're going to be working in a different file in a bit. I'm also going to put a div of container here just to demonstrate this first item. All right, so we're going to create our vars.js here. And the first thing that we're going to do is create our custom property. Now, it's not like the custom properties that you're used to using in CSS. This is basically giving the CSS custom properties steroids and extra power. And here's how we're going to do it. So in our vars.js, we're going to call, and this is available globally, CSS dot, and the method is register property. Inside of here, we're going to open up an object where we have different properties. Now, the different properties that you can find here, if you come here to w3.org and go to this URL, we'll see in this section of the page we have CSS Register Property, where you have your name, your syntax, like what type of value will it accept, and also an initial value. So if it's a color, you can make it black or hex value or whatever. And for the available syntaxes, we can see we have all of these. These are all available for you to use based on the type of CSS property that you want. So for us, we're going to make this one an integer right here. So we're going to make it a name. So the name is just going to be the actual CSS property name. So I'm going to call this color stop. You could call it whatever you want. Syntax. All right, so it's going to be a color. So we're going to say color. All right, and then we can also specify initial value. We'll just say blue. And I think that'll be good right there. That's all we have to do in this file. So now let's go back here and save this as well and go back to main.css. So in main.css, we can say container. Let's give this just a width of 300 pixels and a height of 300 pixels, and then a background. We'll do a linear gradient for this just to show you with this, crazy CSS Houdini superpowers, to show you that we can actually animate gradients without any hackery stuff like we currently have to deal with. So we'll say linear gradient, and we'll say it's going to go from white to our variable color stop. So yes, this CSS file will have access to the CSS properties defined in our vars.js. So, and you can make multiple of them, by the way, just in this form. So we'll also put transition color stop 1 second. All right. Then we're going to say container on hover color stop. So we can redefine the value here. And we'll say, I don't know, black. It's probably going to look not very great, but it'll work. All right, so now we can go ahead. I'm going to right click open with live server. This is an extension for Visual Studio Code. So it is live server extension right here. Go ahead and install that if you want to follow along. So I'm going to open with live server. All right, and where's it at? Oh, and yeah, I screwed up. I forgot a property. Sorry about that. Here, we're going to say inherits false. All right, so if we save this now, we can see it actually shows up this time. And when we hover over it, it does work. So inherits is something that's required. I forgot about that. I apologize. But if it's by default, it defaults to false, and true if this custom property should inherit down the DOM tree in terms of its value. So as you can see, very, very cool stuff. We're not able to do this currently. Oh, and by the way, make sure, I'm not sure, you know what, I'll just make sure to mention this at the beginning of the video that in order for you guys to see any of this stuff, you will need to make sure that your Chrome flags are set to experimental. All right, so let's go ahead and switch gears up a little bit and talk about the Paint API. And I'm going to show you an example using this, and it is very, very, very cool. It allows you, as I mentioned at the beginning, to create different effects or visual elements, kind of similar to the Canvas 2D, where you can do all sorts of things with the help of JavaScript. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll take this. We're going to name this one here to index.js. In fact, I'm not going to use this demonstration anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of it. It's not a big deal. I'm going to rename this. Actually, I'll just create another one, index.js. All right, so we'll save that. All this stuff, we're going to gut that too. Also create one more file, sorry about that, custombd.js. All right, so it's going to be kind of like a, let's say for instance, we have some like heading elements like H1 or H2. And every time we want that heading element to appear, we're going to have some sort of custom like underline associated with it. And we're going to make this so that we can easily tie into it and also make it dynamic in our CSS. So the first thing is we're going to come out to our custom BG and we will name it a class. All right. So this is how you register your own paint property here. So we're going to say Simon BG. That's what I'm calling this, Simon's background. Okay, very clever. Not. All right, so static, we're going to, oh, before we get to that part, we're just going to keep things a little bit more simple. So inside this class, we're going to open up Paint, from which we can pass a context, a size, and properties. I'll just call these props. All right. And so the first thing we'll do to find out, what's happening here exactly, we're just going to console log our context, just like that. All right. And then finally, in order to make this work, we also have to register paint. We're going to call that. And then we pass in the name of this paint element, and you can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it Simon BG. And also we pass in our class above, Simon BG. So hopefully you're following along so far. It's all the rest of our work is pretty much going to take place within this section right here. Now we're also going to, the final step to make this work is come out to our index.js, which is currently referenced here. And we have to add our paint. So we have to call CSS paint worklet dot add module, and then the name of our file, custombg.js. So I know it sounds like a lot of work to get it set up, but that's really it. I mean, outside of doing the custom code to make our custom background right here. So for the structure and the infrastructure of all of this to make it work, this is it. You create a class, you call paint, you register it, and then you call this line right here, the paint worklet, and we add module to that file right here. Okay, so now what we'll do is come in our main.css file, and I'm going to do a little bit of setup work here. So our body, I'm just going to put margin 0, height 100, viewport height. We're going to have a font family. We're going to go back to Montserrat this time, and then padding of 3em. We're also going to do an H1 element, and we're going to say font size 3em, margin top 3em, padding will be 0.2em, and we're going to say background image paint. That's a new one you've never seen. Simon BG. All right. So remember, this is the name that we gave it right here. That's the name that you use right here. So let's go ahead and save this. We're going to go back to our index.html, and this time we did reference a H1 element. So in our H1 element, we'll just say, oh, Houdini. All right, so now going back here, yeah, I accidentally had my custom BG in the CSS folder. Make sure that's outside of there. And you may have to restart your server in order for this to work, the live reload. Sometimes I find that this crashes trying to do this, work with this, this experimental stuff. So the browser will crash sometimes, but nonetheless, here is our console log of context that we can see all here, like the fill style, filter, global, all this stuff that we have access to. We can also console log, if we go back to custom BG, size, and that will apply to the element that it's currently applied to. So the paint size, or as I see in here, it says height is 77. And this is in relation to the element that it's placed onto, and then the width is the width of this section right here. All right, so now we can do some interesting things with it. All right, here's how we do it. So let's get rid of this. And let's say we want to create just like a circle of some sort. All right, so what we do is we put in context, begin path. All right, so that's the first thing. So we're creating a new path of some sort. We can also give it a fill, like a color, or you can do stroke. We're just going to do a fill in this case. So context fill style equals, and then hex value or whatever. We're just going to say red. Next, to create a circle, we're going to use arc. So arc, and the arc accepts several different parameters. We have the width, the height. We also have the size of the circle and a few other values. So for us, let's just make it an equal or an even size. We'll just say, I don't know, maybe 20 by 20. And then we'll say a size of like 8, 0, and then 2 times math dot pi to create the actual circle, which kind of transforms this arc into a circle. And then finally, we'll put in context.fill. I'm not sure how this is going to present itself on our H1 element, because I kind of just guessed with these values right here, these 3 primarily, but let's check it out. There it is. So we've just drawn on here. And by the way, this width value right here, this isn't width really, it's the location of X and Y. I'm sorry about that. So it's X and Y in relation here. So we put 20. So if we made both of these 0 and 0, it's going to start in the very upper left corner where we can't even see half of it. So you can move it around X and Y in this size. So this right here, if we change this to like 15, it should be bigger, and it is rightfully so. All right, so at this point, it's annoying going back and forth, so let me fix this. Okay, so that's not too exciting what we've just done. So let's make it a little bit more interesting, and we can do this with a for loop. All right, so we're going to come out here and we're going to say something like, let's see, we'll say for var I equals 0. We're going to put in I, and we'll just say 8 for now. So we're going to have, oops, I less than 8. So we're going to run through this loop 8 times, and that's going to produce 8 different circles. In a little bit, we'll make this dynamic so that we can specify the amount of circles in CSS. And then I++ right here. So this is a basic for loop. Hopefully you understand some basic JavaScript. If not, well, you're going to be screwed. You're going to be very confused about what we're doing right now. And let's go ahead, and the way we'll set this up, I suppose, is, so we'll create a variable here. So we're going to say let fraction, I'm just going to call it a fraction, equals I times 2. All right, so this is the index, I is the index, and we're just going to multiply it times 2. And that way we'll make this fraction something that is able to increase, and that's going to allow us increase each time it runs through the loop, and that way it'll allow us to position it differently, each circle, if that makes sense. All right, so what we'll do, this is the X location, this value right here. So to make that a little bit more dynamic, we're going to say 20, and then we're going to plus, we're going to take our fraction, and then just take our fraction times 10. All right, so let's see what that does in and of itself, just this code that we just added. All right, so now we can see we have 8 different circles that are all kind of just crammed there together. And let's also make the size just 8. We're gonna make these smaller. There we go. So now they're separated out a little bit more. And what if we want these to kind of show up beneath? All right, so what we'll do is for the Y, we're just gonna say size dot height. Now that cuts them off. I don't want that effect, the way that looks. I'm gonna Control B to get rid of that sidebar. So what we'll do is simply subtract. I'm gonna say maybe like 10. Oh, there we go. And now that works out just great, the way that's worked. All right, so very, very cool stuff. We can add more though. So remember, if you specify context.begin path, we can create more elements essentially. So we're gonna say, let's see here. This time we're not going to create kind of like a closed shape. We're gonna create just like a line. All right, so this one should introduce a different property here. So context move to, all right, and I think we're going to say, for now, I'm just going to hard code this in. I'm just going to say 10. I have no clue what that's going to look like. Then size.height. So this is an X and Y value. So size.height minus 10. Actually, what we'll do is probably just take, let's see here. Well, we'll leave that there. And then what we'll do is we're going to say context. So now we have an X and Y starting position right here. We don't actually have a line yet. So a line has to have a destination. So line 2, and this is where they're going to go to on an X and Y value somewhere within this area. So we're going to say size.width. So that's going to push it all the way out to the left or to the right. All right. And then size.height, we'll just say minus 10. It's going to, that's basically the same value that we have up here. It is the same value that we had up here. And that will create a straight line because these two are the same. So we're just going to say from the X position, this is going to go from 10 and then all the way to the full width. Finally, we say context.stroke. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And there we go. So we created a line that goes all the way past those. What we could do is say, we know we have 8 of these, right? We're going through 8 of these. So we could just say something like 8 times, I don't know, 23. Okay, so that kind of didn't work exactly as I thought it would. Oh, actually, no. We're supposed to do, let's see, where am I at? Did I just screw something up big time? There we go, sorry. We're going to say our, 8 times 23 right here. Sorry, I'm being slow. And then this, we'll say size.width. There we go. Now, sometimes this happens, but there we go. So now we kind of made it a little bit more dynamic. But it's not very dynamic because still people can't specify how many circles. What if for some reason in your use case you wanted to specify how many circles? Maybe you have longer H1 values. By the way, if we go out and we specify maybe a paragraph here with lorem ipsum, and then also maybe another H1. This one will say, how are you doing today? All right, we can see it places onto, actually, let's just do, how are you doing? So you can see, there it goes. Okay, how are you? Might as well just do that. I want these to be different sizes, just so this makes sense. All right, so we can see this is a longer line right here. What if you wanted more dots or circles underneath this? Well, this is where we can make it dynamic. We can also even place these on other elements, by the way. So if we type, if we go here to our CSS and we just copy this and we say, let's see, padding 2em, and then take our H1, change that to P. We can make it apply on any element, really, that we want. All right, so let's go ahead and make this dynamic in the idea that we can pass properties to it. So what we'll do is we're going to come out here to our custom BG, and at the top, in order to gain access to our properties, I guess first it would make sense to register the property first. So let's go to our index.js. So remember we registered a property here. So we need to register another property. We're going to call this number of circles. It's going to be an integer, inherits as false, and initial value will just be 8, like the 8 that we currently have. Save that. We'll go back to custom BG. And in our custom BG, in order to gain access, for our JavaScript to have access to this, we have to get those. So static get in input properties. And then we open this up and return in an array the number or the names of the properties. So we only want one number of circles. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. And now we can make this a little bit more dynamic. So instead of saying 8, hard coding it in, we can say props. Remember, we're getting props from here, dot get, and we get the name, number of circles. All right, so now we'll take this, we're going to copy that, and we'll paste it down here as well. So we save it, and you can still see it's 8, which is great because we know it's working because that's the default value here defined in our index.js. But here's where it becomes truly dynamic. So we can come in here and our H1, for instance, and simply say, or no, maybe our paragraph. Maybe we'll make our paragraph longer. So we'll say number of circles. Let's do like 15. Look at that. How cool is that? So I know it's not perfect because the white space isn't even, but nonetheless, very, very, very cool stuff that we can do with this to make them really dynamic. All right, so hopefully you found that useful. I know I'm very excited about CSS Houdini and what the future holds. Let me know if you make anything interesting with it. I think in the future, we're going to see probably a marketplace of ideas where people can just grab different things with the Paint API, for instance, and apply it to their sites. All right, I'll see you guys real soon. Goodbye.